All right, good evening, everyone. I will call this meeting to order for April 13th, 2021. May I get a motion that the agenda for the April 13th, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as presented? Councillor Chenard will make that motion. Any concerns? All in favor? Motion carried. Can I get a motion that the minutes of the March 23rd, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as presented? Councillor Wilkinson makes that motion. Any comments or concerns? I will call the vote. All in favor? Motion carried. Next, we have a delegation from Compass Assessment Consultants. Mr. Aaron Stublik will be presenting us with the 2020 assessment. Welcome, Mr. Stublik.
Yes, I'll hand that over to Aaron. Yep.
How is everybody this evening?
Great.
Excellent.
Good to hear. So it's my pleasure once again to give you guys some information on your upcoming assessment. I've got a presentation here that I'll share with you here in a moment. I believe everybody should be able to see that now.
Yep, excellent.
Perfect. So it's been a weird year in basically all facets of everyone's life, and your assessment is, I guess, no different. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is your overall changes in your assessment, the impact that COVID-19 has had on the assessment year over year. We'll talk about the residential inventory and about the non-residential inventory. The most impacted inventory being the hotels and motels, and then looking forward as to what we kind of see in the future and potential changes that we might see into next year and years to come. So overall, the assessment base of the town went down about 2.99%. So that's for all taxable property. For residential properties, we've seen about a 2.1% decrease. And this is a total assessment change. So that includes your new construction, any demolitions, and any market change that has happened over the last year. The non-residential properties saw a larger decrease in the base at about negative 4.71%. Again, demolitions, new builds, and market change are considered in that entire base change. This chart here will show you guys on the municipality as a whole where the changes were. So we had about 21% of the inventory saw a 0 to 10% increase in their assessment. 3% saw negligible to no change, and then 68% saw a negative 0 to 10%, and then 5% saw a greater reduction than that, and 0.82% saw more than 25%. By dollar change, you can see the majority of properties kind of went down between $1,000 and $25,000 in their assessment. Some properties did see an increase there, the majority of them being between $1,000 and $10,000. So minor shifts upwards for some properties. A lot of properties did see a little bit of a negative shift, the majority being between $1,000 and $10,000 down. So not huge shifts for each individual property. The impacts of COVID, July 1st is our valuation date. So that was kind of right at the end of the first wave. Restrictions were starting to loosen a little bit. So all the market information leading up to that was kind of in that first initial shock of what was happening. So we did try and do some analysis on what sales occurred between March 2020 and July 1st of 2020. And we really focused our modeling on what was happening there. And then we brought in the other years of sales to support that valuation. There was a mix of activity throughout the town. The residential market was steady through the last year. Quiet non-residential markets though, little activity. I think investors are slightly spooked and not really too eager to just jump into the market. So we didn't see very many sales up till July 1st of 2020. There were a few sales that happened afterwards that we'll take into consideration for next year's assessment. Your hospitality market was by far the most impacted. The public health measures, and they were already being impacted by the strained oil and gas economics. So when those properties are hit with travel restrictions, that really impacts their performance and in turn impacts their value. So focusing here in the residential, I focused right in for March through June 2020. 33 sales happened in that time frame. That's not too bad. You can see here our median assessment ratio, so that's our assessment to the sales ratio, is at 98.1%. So our assessments are just about 2% under what market value is, which is a good place to be. It creates a little bit more stability and very much defendable assessments for you guys. And at 98%, you can see that the assessments are mimicking market value at that time frame. When we open it up to the entire time frame of sales that we are legislated to use, there was 382 sales that were used in the model. The ratio increased a point to 98.2%. And you can also see that because we're at that level, it's effectively mimicking the market as well. I included these ratio statistics here. The median percentage is a legislated number. We need to be between 95% and 105%. So at 98.2, we're very close to mimicking full market value. The coefficient of dispersion measures the ratio that's at the highest to the ratio that's at its lowest. Again, for residential properties, we're legislated to be under 15. So a COD of 6.9 shows that the ratios are really tight. We don't have very much fluctuation between the top end and the low end. And then the price-related differential as well at 100.9 shows this isn't a regulated number, but it's a very important statistic to show that lower end properties are being valued not over or undervalued compared to higher end properties, and vice versa. Higher end properties aren't being valued higher or lower versus lower value properties. So at 100.9, we're perfect right there. For our non-residential properties, March through July, we didn't have any arm's length transactions. So there were some transfers of, in particular, a couple hospitality properties, but they were either duress or a non-arm's length transactions. So they weren't really considered in the criteria. After July, we did have some non-residential sales, which were arm's length that again, we'll be analyzing for next year's valuation. When we bring in the whole supply of sales that we have for the year, so from July 2017 to July 2020, there was 33 sales that we used. We've got a median percentage of 97%. Now that's a touch lower than we were for the residential stuff. Without very much market indicators on the non-res stuff for July 1st valuation date, I thought it to be prudent to be cautious with the valuation. So we did take into consideration that there was increased risk with COVID-19 for investors. property values probably did soften a little bit, especially when we're talking in the non-residential stuff, which is affected by a lot of the public health measures. So that's why our median percentage is just slightly lower, because we're using older sales and comparing them to a more current valuation date. The COD, again, it lines up very well. So we've got consistency between our assessments, and the price related differential also shows that our higher end properties aren't being higher or lower valued compared to lower end properties. Another thing that impacted your guys' non-residential inventory, it seems like a long time ago, being as we've dealt with so much in between, but the arson of the couple dealerships there, they were high value properties and we've lost them out of the assessment base. So that's impacted the assessment base. Also the hotel and motel properties, we've got quite a few of them in town, and with most of them being impacted between 25 and 30%, that creates an impact on the base. So that's where we end up with that negative 4.71%. To focus on the hotels and motels, so I've said it a couple times already here, but the travel restrictions put pressure on the hotels and motels. Their occupancy rates have dipped. And that impacts their income and therefore affects the value of the real estate there. Its trend is that it's a loss in value across the gamut in this inventory, whether you're looking nationally, provincially, locally. Pretty much any hotel property has suffered some sort of setback with this. I mean, there are certain markets that actually saw increases, but they had local disasters or something like that that put people out of their homes and into hotels, kind of things. So generally speaking, the trend for these type of properties is lower values for this year anyways. Attending a few conferences here in the spring. Hotel experts in the Americas are kind of aiming for a full projected recovery of the hotel market by 2024. As vaccines roll out, that certainly becomes more plausible, and hopefully, we see restrictions lifted and these type of properties can start to flourish again. Locally for you guys, the oil and gas industry hardships have been putting pressure on the hotel inventory over the last couple of years. That being said, being as Edson does have a lot of that work force that stays in the hotels here, they actually help prop up these properties during this time. So they kind of hit their base because they still needed to house workers. So they weren't impacted as potentially as bad as some other areas. The city of Edmonton's hotel inventory dropped about 40%. They also have a lot more conference rooms and other facilities that are involved. So they really took a beating versus the limited service inventory that doesn't cater as much to those conference type crowds and large gatherings. So we were helped a little bit by the fact that we've got a transient workforce that does stay in town quite often. We did have 3 hotel transfers in the past year. As I mentioned before, they were non-arm's length type of sales. And again, their sale prices were indicating a bit of a weakened market. So it was not an opportune time for them to transfer, but the situation made that happen. So as far as your assessment goes, we've got a decrease of approximately 25 to 30% on the hotel motel inventory. The decrease is due to the poor performance and lower revenues. We are projecting this to improve as the industry returns to normality. We're approaching the valuation date for next year. And unfortunately, we took a couple steps back in our public health restrictions last week. So hopefully we see some improvement in these properties and their performance. But these lower values may be with us to stay for at least another year before we start to see a recovery, just because of timing, really. So that's something to be cognizant of. But again, that's our major focus of assessment-based loss was within this inventory. Looking forward, the light is on at the end of the tunnel. We're hoping for these reduced public health measures here in the future. There is talk about that all being lifted by the summer, so that's good recovery. One thing that I did notice is leading up to valuation date, we didn't see the residential properties picking up steam, but after the valuation date, with the things that actually happened with COVID, lower interest rates and things like that, the sales picked up a tiny bit and those market values recovered slightly. So we may see the residential inventory recover a bit of what we lost, if not recover. And then the non-residential will follow suit with as the public health restrictions ease and investor confidence comes back. Our services ongoing will be reviewing the market trends locally, provincially, and nationally to make sure that we are staying on top of what's actually happening. And we always commit to maintaining our assessment valuation standards and making sure that we do produce the most reasonable and defendable assessment for you. That's pretty much the information I've got for council. If there are any questions, please let me know.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Aaron. I'll open the floor to some questions. Councillor Wilkinson.
It isn't really a question through the chair, it's a statement. Aaron, I would just like to thank you very much, and I'm really glad you're still our assessor from the long ago days on that assessment review board. And I did appreciate then that you helped me with many citizens here in town, and very glad to have you again doing our assessment. So thank you for a good report.
Well, thank you very much. I'm more than happy to be here. I'm happy to be the town of Edson's assessor, and it's always good working with you folks.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? You're getting off. Oh, Mayor Zahara.
We're not going to have him present and not ask any questions. It's just way too easy. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Steblik. Just wondering, when you look at, I know you perform assessment work throughout the province of Alberta, and you touched on it a little bit in your presentation, but how is Edson comparing to other communities our size? And what has our assessment been doing over the last 5 years? Is it overall pretty stable, or has it been a considerable decline over the last 5 years?
Overall in the non-residential inventory, you've been stable. The non-residential for the the past 5 years has been stable. The last two started to slip a little bit with what has happened with the sales, and then the wrench that was thrown in to us this year. Municipalities similar to you, I'd have to get back on to you. Most of the municipalities that I deal with, you guys are right in the middle. So I deal with either larger rurals or smaller urban. So I could get back to council with that information. I think just talking with some tax agents and things like that, as far as your hotel inventory, you fared a little bit better than some areas. I touched on it again, like City of Edmonton, City of Calgary, just because of your transient workforce kind of propped up those buildings.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Abar.
Thanks, through the chair to Aaron. Thanks for the presentation. I think last year you've answered this question before, but maybe you can answer it again just for clarification. How many houses a year do you do an assessment on, and how frequently would a house get assessed if people are a bit maybe anxious about what theirs looks like?
Fair enough. So in Alberta, we're on an annual assessment cycle. So every year, every property within your municipality and within the province gets a new assessment. So we take 3 years of sales, we gain a new year, we lose an old year, and we carry forward like that. As far as reinspect goes, we try to visit at least a quarter of the town every year. Again, that may be a struggle, as it was, well, last year actually worked out pretty good. The restriction was lifted and we were able to go door to door, but we'll see what happens this year. We may tweak that a little bit to do mailers or something like that, depending on what we're allowed to do. But yeah, every year it's a very progressive system, being as you get a new assessment every year based on market changes that have happened over that last year, versus some other jurisdictions like Ontario, which is on a 4-year cycle. So they're still dealing with the 2016 valuation.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Steblik. Excellent presentation. Okay, we'll move on to Executive Office and Special Ballots 2021. Welcome, Ms. Parsons.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. So we don't have a lot to add to this report. In the last election, Council had asked us to give special ballots a try. We hadn't done them in the past. The uptake wasn't large. We received 7 applications for the special ballots. All 7 were returned. 2 were rejected as they were not completed properly. So we had 5 valid votes by way of special ballot. So far, the government hasn't announced any changes to the requirements you have to meet to vote by way of special ballot. Either you're physically disabled and unable to attend to the voting stations, or you're out of the country, or you're a returning officer in a other area where you wouldn't be able to attend your jurisdiction. But the government hasn't made any changes to that with respect to COVID. I'm assuming they're kind of holding out to see how the vaccine does, and then maybe they won't have to. So basically at this point, just looking for Council's feedback as to whether or not they would like to proceed with special ballots again in this election.
Mayor Zahara.
Thank you, Ms. Parsons, and I would support moving ahead with special ballots. I think that we don't know what is going to be happening here with COVID and the vaccines. I certainly would hope that it was not going to be an issue coming up in the fall, but there's still maybe some folks that would be under quarantine, or maybe in some sort of situation where they would only be able to vote through special ballot, especially with the increased timelines with quarantine rules and self-isolation. So, and I think it's important that we give all Edsonites the ability to vote, no matter where they're at.
Did you want to respond, Ms. Parsons?
Thank you, through the chair. Just to clarify, but I suppose this would be taken care of. The government would have to make the change, but if a person was affected by COVID, that right now is not a requirement or a reason under the act that they would be able to vote by special ballot. The provincial government will have to make an exception to the act.
Thank you. We'll have Councillor Curry and then Councillor Wilkinson.
I will just echo what the mayor said. I'm in full support of doing it this year. I think that it is definitely a situation where this could come up, where it is needed more. And I think we just need to make sure that we advocate to have that act changed if it's not already naturally done as it should be done, because I'm sure it will happen and there will be special requirements put in for isolation. So I fully support using it.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, I'm in support of this. The cost doesn't seem to be prohibitive. And I do believe possibly if COVID's over, many of our citizens will already be in Arizona by October. And absenteeism from your place of residence is a way to use the ballot. So and we need to advertise it well. Thank you.
Councillor Chenard?
I'll just echo what everyone else is saying. I'm in full support of it for all the various reasons. It worked last time. Let's do it again.
And Councillor Byer is in support as well, and so am I. Last election, I had a friend that had to work out of town, so he did his early vote, and so I was appreciative of that, and I think we should continue doing it. Excellent. So we'll move on to draft automated voting system, bylaw 2257.
Thank you. So again, not a lot to add to the report. The Elections Act requires us to pass a bylaw to use alternative voting equipment, should we so desire. This is something that administration would like to give a try. The cost isn't crazy. I don't foresee it moving our budget much past what it was last election, a little bit, but not a lot. And it'll streamline the counting process and make that a lot faster. So we won't need as many people at the close of the voting station to help with the counting. That's all I have for you. Look forward to any questions.
Can I just make a quick question before we get into other councillors? Because I think it will clarify. I had a tough time following the process, like when a voter comes into the building. Can you just walk us through that process, and then maybe that might answer some questions?
Sure, thank you, through the chair. So it basically looks exactly the same as it does during the regular voting time, except when after they come back from filling out their ballot, they'll just insert it into the machine instead of inserting it directly into the ballot box. And so the machine just drops it into a ballot box after counting it.
I see. So we still have a paper ballot. We still have a paper copy in the end that can be counted a second time if necessary.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Councillor Byer.
Thanks, through the chair to Ms. Parsons. My question was, have any other jurisdictions or municipalities used this system before that you're aware of?
Thank you. So through the chair to Councillor Byer, yes, I did do a post on the Municipal Clerks Association website asking for opinions on the different technologies, and there was 3 main ones that were used by the various municipalities. So we did go out and receive some quotes from all 3 of them, and everyone had their perks and not. But yes, many other municipalities use them as well.
Councillor Chenard and then Councillor Wilkinson.
Thanks, Kayla. I'm following this through and I'm understanding you fill out your paper and you put it in, but sometime when people are balloting, they don't necessarily put the X or the check mark, right? So when you're physically looking at it with your eye, you can see their intent. So what kind of margin of error does this machine have? For a prime example, if it says an X and you put a check, is there a margin of error on this?
Thank you. So through the chair, I'm not 100% certain what the margin of error is. That would be a question I could ask when they do the training. However, they do, if it goes in and the tabulator can't figure out what the card is saying, it will reject it, at which time the person has the opportunity to have that ballot be spoiled, and they can go get a new one and fill it out. And then the people at the table could just redirect them as to how specifically how to fill out the ballot. But my assumption would be they wouldn't be too sensitive in the right amount.
Councillor Wilkinson and then Councillor Curry.
Through the chair to Kayla, I guess shades of Florida, but we have to move forward. And I guess really the worst thing would be that we would have to end up counting them if something didn't work. So I don't think that we can lose in that way. I do hope that we can sort of look into the configuration at the Legion so that when they are inserting them back in, they're not walking through the vote line sort of to make it clear and also very clear of who and what they're voting for. Because last time people were told they didn't have to vote for the school division trustees to a trustee that was running. So we do need to have it really clear. It is confusing in the Legion when people walk in, I think. So I don't know how we can get it a little more streamlined, but that would be something to look into, I would think. Thank you.
Councillor Curry.
I agree. I think it's a great idea to give it a shot. I think it's worth it to see if it speeds up the process. It makes it easier. And kind of when I was understanding this, it'll actually catch more spoiled votes because you wouldn't catch spoiled votes. So it's just a spoiled vote. So if somebody makes a mistake with that X, whereas this will, so I think it actually benefits the voters because the machine itself will catch that and you have a chance to fix that versus if you just put it in the box, it's a spoiled vote. So I think if we can, make it more accurate, the better, and knowing that they're in a box and if something goes wrong, worst case scenario, we have to count them. I don't think there's much risk to it.
Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Ms. Parsons, I just wanted to mention that I am in support of this. I share exactly what Councillor Curry just said. I think that there's little risk, and with the paper ballot still available, should we have to count them, then I think that's great. So I'm in support of proceeding with this. Thank you.
Anyone else? I have a quick question for Ms. Parsons. Is there going to be one count machine, or is there going to be one at, for instance, Parkland Lodge and one somewhere, at the hospital maybe? Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. So we do typically do the two institutional voting stations, one at Parkland Lodge and one at the hospital. That has been our practice in past elections. So one of the machines we usually do the morning or afternoon at one facility and the morning or afternoon at the other facility. So the machine will travel from one and then to the other. And then I believe we have 3 or 4 machines that will be available at the actual voting station. And then once the institutional ones are closed, we could bring that one in and use it at the station as well. So we should have 3 to 4 set up consistently at the voting station on voting day.
Okay, Mayor Zahara.
Unlike me, I'm going to actually play a little devil's advocate here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. What happens if we have a major power outage that day? What's going to be the process to ensure that ballots can be counted? I hate to bring that up, but it would be just our luck, something like that.
Thank you, through the chair. So honestly, we would just go back to manual counting. The ballots can still be filled out the way they're supposed to be, and they just be dropped into the auxiliary slot on the ballot box. And then we just have to count them manually like we would like we would have in the past.
All right, I will finish off as someone that's gone through a judicial recount. I can tell you hundreds of ballots are wasted every election because they're filled out improperly. And so I completely agree with Councillor Curry's comment that if we can save 99 of those and ask the person to recast their vote, I think they will get their democratic right, and we'll have a better system. So I think this is a fantastic idea, and I'm in full support. Thank you. Move on to corporate services, the 2021 budget adjustments. Welcome, Ms. Bettner.
Good evening. All right, so it's that time of year again to just finalise the budget. We did have a few changes as listed in the memo. A few of them, we've got some proposed funding ideas listed there, with some of them using some of the reserves that to match that. We had things like insurance came in, was a lot higher than we thought, but then we also had, conversely, we had some things come in that were lower than we had originally budgeted. So overall, with the proposed fundings we've put into the memo there, we come back to a very similar tax increase as what was discussed in December. One of the main things I think that we can see here is under the Repsol Place. We had Repsol Place and also community services as well, community development, sorry. Just go back over their budgets because COVID continued. We had originally budgeted 2021 as a quote unquote normal year. So we did have them go back and look at some of those revenues that have been lost and did an adjustment for those to the budget, which required a use of about 144,000 from the COVID reserve to offset that decrease from the original budget. We also have the utility credit going on as well. We added the ACES proposal. We added the community services fee assist that was brought to council last week. So we've managed to catch a lot of these things that we've been discussing in the last few months as well and incorporate them within this budget too. Overall, at the end, the budget passed in December, we had a 1.9. This is presented with a 1.96. There's one part of it that we wouldn't fund from a reserve, and that is the province's grant in lieu or grants in places of taxes, depending on which thing you're actually reading about. So this is their taxation on their properties in town. They don't pay us taxes, but they pay us a grant in lieu of taxes, which is usually the same amount. They now have informed us over the last couple of years that they're only going to be paying 50% of that amount of taxation, and we must generate those taxes from our other taxation. We must put it on to our mill rates to collect that. So the extra 7,000 there to bring it up to that 0.06 increase was just the difference between what we had collected last year and what the taxes are for the provincial buildings this year. Cut in half, there was an extra 7,000 that we needed to generate from the taxes. So that is why the increase has gone up from the 1.9 to the 1.96. The rest of them we have offset with reserves as mentioned in the memo. So I'll open the operating up to any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you. I'll open up for comments and questions. Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I see with your policing as well, where the Solicitor General's just said that they're going to download these costs to the municipalities, and then you're talking about this taxation. Have we written any letter? Have we lobbied? Have we done anything to say that this isn't satisfactory to us as a municipality? Like, I don't know where the government thinks that we need to put on extra taxes on our people. They're just downloading more and more, and yeah, I don't know why we're tolerating it. That's my question. So have we done anything to say that we're not happy with these two items?
I'll let the Mayor.
Mayor Zahara.
Yes, I've suggested that we will either put up parking meters in front of provincial offices for their staff, or no, we won't actually be doing that. But this comes back down to, it would be nice for everybody only to have 50%, pay for 50% of their bills. So we absolutely have, and through Alberta Urban Municipalities Association, been lobbying as well. And this goes back to the point why we have to focus on utility rates to generate revenue, because that's how we can make them pay for the services that they are using within their facilities, and makes it a fair system. As you know, Councillor Wilkinson and the rest of the council knows, the Solicitor General does not listen to anybody. He just does what he wants. So, which is unfortunate. he was our municipal affairs minister. We know how that went. So,
Yeah, we do. That's why we need to get on them.
So, and don't forget, this government also cut back how much revenue we are getting off of fines. And then at the same time says they haven't cut policing budgets. They absolutely have, because every municipality relies on those fines to offset their policing costs. So smoke and mirrors by this government. And unfortunately, municipal taxpayers end up paying for it, and we get the blame for it, which is unfortunate.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Come on, someone.
All right. So
I have a comment.
sorry.
I was waiting for somebody. With a 3% assessment reduction, and we're looking at almost 2% tax increase here, or a budget increase. I am strongly advocating that we use almost all of the tax stabilization fund. It's currently at 220,000. I can't think of a better time in history when we would need to use the tax stabilization fund. So I'll open the floor to comment. Okay, Ms. Bittner.
We do also have to remember that because of the tax subsidies we gave last year, we actually are still using a subsidy towards taxes here from that MOST grant, about $340,000 to keep it even to the 1.9. That's going to take us 5 years to get that back. The tax stabilization fund is, once we use that, it's gone. We have to try and then have to tax to put it back in the reserves. It doesn't sort of replenish itself. So I'd just like to just bring that to the forefront, that we are still in the midst of this, and have actually subsidized taxes already to the tune of about $340,000 with this budget.
Agreed. Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Ms. Bittner. Based on the assessment and the proposed 1.96 tax increase that's on the table right now, what would the taxes be on an average house of $350,000? Do you know what that would look like this year?
Through the chair to Councillor Byer. Once we know if this is the budget that council wants to go ahead with, we can then look at the mill rates that need to be done to generate this. Next week, when I bring this back for passing, we will definitely bring back all those mill rates, all those comparisons that we usually do every year for you to see what those changes have done. The assessment does drive the mill rate, but it's just to generate that amount of money that you wish for your budget. But we will definitely show you all those differences between the different houses and amounts that they would be paying compared to 2020 original, because that's what we've been comparing everything to, not the 2020 emergency, because that was when they had the tax rebates and everything. So we would always show it compared to the original.
Councillor Chenard.
Through the chair to Sarah, on the front page where you got the utility credit of 150,000, was that just proposed? I don't believe we passed this, and if we did, I can't find it in there.
Through the chair to Councillor Chenard, it was definitely discussed at the meeting. The other two things did come back and were passed, the tax, delaying the tax date and the utility dates. I have encompassed the 150 because we did get a consensus at that time that was right. What we wanted to do. So I've incorporated that in this budget, and that will then be passed when the budget is passed.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Mayor Zahara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly would be in support of trying to bring this down. I was not anticipating a third closure and third round of restrictions. I never thought that would happen. I don't know if the best way to do this is to lower our overall tax rate or have a discussion about some targeted measures for those most impacted by this. I don't know if there is any, I know the administration has done a lot of work on this budget. Things have changed since the original discussions of where we can maybe find $100,000 in this budget if there is any room whatsoever. And then maybe pulling some more money out of reserves for this year. I think we're in a unique situation this year. I think we have a lot of things to look forward to in the future. We just got to get to a place that I think would be a little bit more palatable. I don't know if administration has any thoughts on that.
Through the chair to Mayor Zahara. We can always go back and look through the budget and see if we can find that. It would be a reduction in the level of service though for $100,000. There'd be some things that we wouldn't be able to do that we usually may have done. And then to get that back to bring that level of service back up is putting that back into future budgets. So just have to keep that in mind as well. Anything we do now, we generally have to then make up for it later. And that's something that we have to always be aware of. Like the tax rebate we did last year, the most grant, luckily we did receive that. We're using that to take us for the next 5 years to get us back to where we were. So sometimes those little reductions can actually have quite an impact in the future. So I would just like to make that, put that in your minds when you're discussing it.
Follow up, Mayor Zahara.
Yeah, thank you. And I think one thing we have to keep in mind, and I'm sure the public has already forgotten about this, is that we are also dealing with a huge decrease in revenue, as I mentioned earlier, from fines, which offsets a huge part of our policing budget because the province basically went and took all that money away from us. So that has to be found through taxation. I'm wondering if maybe we lower our reserve transfers this year to maybe relieve some of that pressure. I'm just a little afraid, or not, I shouldn't say afraid, I'm a little concerned about what the decrease in assessment and then what this is going to look like with an increased budget amount. So if we can fine tune some way, I certainly would be in support of that. Obviously, there's things that we do want to do. I think we all agree. Things like the money for the Skills Bike Park are vitally important for that asset to maintain it. And we also want to ensure that we have some sort of regular level of service. Maybe it's 1 or 2 less summer students. I don't know what the answer is, but while trying to maintain that service level by still finding some savings at the same time, it's delicate.
Mayor, Councillor Wilkinson.
To the chair, and like some of our expenses, I'm looking here at Evergreens Foundation where we're requisitioning more, and that just happened because of COVID. Like we have vacancies that weren't filled due to that, and of course bills as well. It's just unfortunate with COVID, and I don't know if we can pull everything out to save people on this. It's difficult, isn't it, with the travel too? I just wonder. We've certainly, as a council, we've traveled less. No FCM, no AUMA, all the Zoom meetings, they must cost less. I hope, because they're certainly less effective for me. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chenard.
Through to Sarah, just looking at the front page, thinking outside of the box, and I do appreciate. So I see 1.9 tax increase, 150,000. 150,000 is approximately 1.4. So if we eliminate those two numbers, we bring it down. And I do appreciate when you put a zero tax increase in play, they're saying, okay, it'll take years to cover. But once COVID is gone and people are back working, if someone has to, let's say, take a 5% because last year they did it that way, it's a lot easier to recover costs when people are back working. Right now, every savings to everybody during COVID, and I agree with the mayors, now we're doing a third wave. Nobody projected this, but it's real, it's happening. It might be June, July before we see any kind of norm. So I'd like to see that number lowered, cut out this, and so be it. In 2-3 years from now, we have to go up 5-6%. But when people are back working, it's easy to accept a tax increase when you have a lot more income. Right now, people are struggling. Regardless, I just think the perception of the positive attitude is, to me, if you go zero tax increase, that means you put a hold on spending. And then in good years, we can remind people that we've cut back last year through grants and stuff of 5%. we can remind people that we need to play catch up. So now the times are better. Sometimes you got to swallow the hard pill of a tax increase, but you're in better times.
Anyone? Ms. Bittner?
Just in reply to Mia Zahara earlier, we could look at reducing some of those reserve transfers. We did go back to the full usual transfers that we do in a normal year. I know that the reserves are attached on here. We can go through those. There may be something there that that council might like to maybe reduce. Energy reserve, for example, we're putting the full 370 in there this year. Maybe, you know, to reduce that down a little bit could be a possibility. Just that would then offset that tax increase.
Councillor Curry.
My greatest appetite would be for that, Sarah, if we are doing anything. I know we are all really concerned, but I also know that last year we didn't have that much lower. We almost had the same amount of people paying taxes than they did the year before. So the amount that was, so we're discussing this, but the taxes were paid this year. And for some people, Councillor Chenard, they are still in good times. This is what they make. So to do a 5-6% increase for some people in their normal times, what they usually make, that would not be okay. So I'd be willing to look at that, but I just really think we just have to be really careful with long term. We've gotten in a situation, we have the infrastructure deficit that we have because people made in the moment decisions, not the future decisions. So I'd be willing to look at supporting not putting as much into reserves. I think that's a way to ensure that we're still maintaining and we'll be catching up for 5 years anyways. Because I do think that for the average person, 5, 6, 7, 8% is a percentage doesn't matter. That in a normal year is not something they can handle. Most people's change in incomes are not that big year to year.
Mayor Zahara and then Councillor Bard.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would have to agree that even in good times, people don't want to see their taxes going up exponentially. I like the idea of lessening how much is going to go into the energy reserve. I really do, because that is not impacting any service levels. We've seen last year when we did cut back, even though it was quite significant, there was some little things that we weren't doing that people were quite upset about, even in the times that we were. So trying to find that delicate balance, and I think that way we're not building in a problem within our budgets where we can go back to normal the following year. But I would also say that I think one of the mistakes that we did make last year is not indicating on those tax notices how much was being subsidized from other revenue sources. So people didn't really have a good idea of the work that went into that, and a lot of hard work by both administration and council. So I would advocate for that. And the other thing is, this is all based on assessment. So if you have an increased assessment, you still may see a tax increase. So it's really hard to show that to individual properties because we're talking on a more of a global scale.
Someone else, oh, Councillor, first we'll let Ms. Bittner reply and then Councillor Bard.
Thank you, through the chair. With the energy reserve, though, we do also have to remember that at the moment we have our municipal energy manager who is going through and looking for projects that would help us reduce our energy consumptions, and that would really be the reserve where we would fund some of those projects too. So we just be aware we don't want to necessarily strip that too much. Again, just something to be cognizant of when we're discussing the reserves.
Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Ms. Bittner. Regarding the Griffiths Park renovations, I understand that some of that funding is coming out of an operating reserve. Is any of the money coming out of taxation, or is it all through the reserve? And then I believe we had a conversation that we wouldn't replenish that reserve. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Byer, that's all being paid for from their reserves. They would then need to come up with a plan on how they were to replenish those reserves. We're using the I'm just having a quick look at them over my shoulder here. At the end, once that's done, the Recreation and Culture Reserve would then have about $40,000 left in it. So they would need to then come up with with their strategy on how they would wish to replenish that. We are working, of course, on the reserve policy that we've been looking around at what other communities do, and some have them, some don't. So we're kind of working our way through that, and that's due to come to you at the strategic planning session. So we can look at that then.
Councillor Chenard.
Just to be clear, not talking 8-9%, but I keep hearing mistakes were made in the past. So if we always need to do a 2 or 3 tax increase, then where do we project? When are we going to, if it's 2 or 3 every year inflation, we need to correct, like last year we said hypothetically we went behind 5. So in 2 years, 10 years, 5 years, when are we going to start to increase taxes to make up for what we lost? So I'm hearing you're not, everyone's, or several individuals are against doing a 1.9 decrease this year. So if in the past, then somewhere along the line, we have to play catch up. So it may not be 8 or 9%, but if every year is 2, every year for the next 5 years, we got to add 1% or do it all at once, or do we do it slowly? So I'm just basically commenting somewhere along the line, if we fell behind, we have to play catch up.
Anyone want to reply to that, or?
Through the chair to Councillor Chenard, I mean, at the moment we are playing catch up. That's what the most grant is subsidising for the next 5 years. We're doing that so that we didn't have to do a big tax increase this year from the emergency budget. It would, it would have been quite a huge tax increase. So we are looking at using that subsidy so that we don't have those huge jumps. We're having these little jumps over the next few years, so that after 5 years we get back to a normal and try and keep within a more sort of usual tax increase for all of those years.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Byron.
Thanks. Through the chair to Ms. Bittner. So until we have an idea of what this tax increase actually looks like, when are we required to pass this budget? Are we going to be given more time to discuss this again, or is it going to be coming directly to us to pass?
Through the chair to Councillor By, we were going to bring it back next week to pass, depending on how the conversation went tonight. Generally, the budget that we're working with is the one that was passed in December. These are just adjustments to it. There just happened to be a few more adjustments than we normally would see at this stage. We would definitely have to pass it before the tax notices get sent out on the 15th of May. So the next, the council meeting on the 4th would be the very last one that we could have to pass the budget and pass the mill rate bylaw.
Councillor Curry.
Through the chair to Ms. Bittner, would you be able to bring it back with the option of decreasing reserve transfers? Like, I think we can see our other options, but that's one.
Through the chair to Councillor Curry, I can do that now. Like if I'm instructed at this meeting today that that's where you would like us to find the, say $100,000 to bring it down from the 1.96. I don't know exactly what it would be, around 1-ish. I can't say for sure. We can do that now and bring it back to you next week for passing. It just depends how much. How far you want us to try and dig into to redo this budget. It's going to be very difficult to go through line by line to try and find where we can save 5 here or 10 there, sort of thing. If we are going to do the reserve option, it's very easy to do that, and I could still bring it back next week.
Mayor Zahara and then Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Councillor Sorensen. I don't think we need to go line by line, but I think just looking at the reserve transfers, what we may not necessarily have to do this year. I do think that Councillor Wilkinson did bring up a point in legislative services. We didn't spend, I think we saved about $25,000 last year. I don't see us doing much traveling as a council. So we can certainly, if that's our normal budget amount, see if there's room to tweak that, as well as using that energy reserve transfer. Our energy manager is doing some fantastic work, and I'm sure he'll come up with a long list of projects. But that can't be our main priority right now. Some of those will be longer term anyway, and there may be some granting opportunities to fund some of those. So I think that's where I would like to see us go.
I will chime in. I agree on finding 1% somewhere from the reserves. I'd also like to bring up a new item, if I may. When we finalized the budget, we were still, the revenue sharing agreement was still up in the air. And since then we've finalized it, or we've secured it. So I would like to propose that we move $1 million from the revenue sharing capital reserve to the civic cultural facility reserve. I'll open the floor to comment. Councillor Wilkinson.
Okay, through the chair, I do want to talk to Sarah. I don't agree with your transfer, but Sarah, I did want to really thank you for preparing this budget, and it's great that you have such comprehensive understanding of our budget, and you're our acting CAO. It really works well. The reserve transfer is the easy way, but as you say, we have someone hired who is looking into ways where they're tentatively planning on using this reserve. So I don't know if that's the best thing, cutting them off at the knees when they're hired to do a job now. And I think you have a good understanding of the whole picture here, which I appreciate. Even professional development, I can't imagine that's been costing much because there's no place to go or do. So I hope that you could just use your discretion and come back and trying to save us the money in the best way that you think's the best for the town of Edson.
Reply by Ms. Bittner.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilkinson. Like I said, if we do remove things from the budget because we're not using them this year, we then have to put them back in future years, and that adds to taxation in that year. So you always have to be cognizant of that too. That if that's removed and affects the taxation because of that removal, you will have to make that up into the future. That's something that we found in the past. We've removed things thinking, oh, this is going to help this year. And then all of a sudden we have to put it back in, and we have to go up 1.5% to put that back in. So removing those things from the budget for a temporary reason might not necessarily be the best avenue to take.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Curry and then Mayor Zahara.
May I be allowed to,
Sure.
Chair? Thank you to the chair. Just currently we have 800,000 in that energy reserve, Ms. Bittner, but I know we do have some capital coming out of that, but we currently do have 828 in that. That's our closing balance.
Or that's our yes. That will be our balance at the end of 2021 in that reserve.
Okay. So we do definitely have some space there that we could take it and still have a decent closing balance. And then my next question was, where was that the $1 million that Councillor Sorensen was talking about? Where was that to go?
I propose taking it out of the revenue sharing. Sorry, revenue sharing capital fund. Sorry, I can't find it now, but I'm pretty sure it's called the revenue sharing reserve, and moving it into the civic cultural capital reserve. Through
the chair to Councillor Curry, that would leave about 1.7 in the revenue sharing at the end of the year.
Okay,
if we moved $1 million over to the future cultural facility reserve.
So just to be clear, instead of that revenue sharing closing at 2.7, it would be closing at 1.7. And what is that, the purpose of that revenue sharing? Just to move it where we need it at the time?
Through the chair, sorry, the purpose of the reserve, or?
No, sorry, yeah, that revenue sharing, like that closing balance, do we usually just move it where we need it for capital projects the following year and such?
Through the chair to Councillor Curry, it's the last few years, some of those reserves have been a little bit involved in our multi-use funding. We weren't sure if we were going to get the grant, so we had this money for that in case we didn't have that. Any of these reserves can be moved by council elsewhere. In the past, we have kept that separate and used it for projects like one-off projects, things that aren't going to be ongoing operational costs, but we can offset a project. For example, if we're doing the land use bylaw and we have an amount of money in there to get consultants for that, we can offset that from this reserve. That's sort of what in the past is what it's been used for. The multiplex is now, we know where we're funding things from, the grant, the debenture, etc. You'll notice in the reserves when we get there is a transfer back into that revenue sharing, because we were thinking we might have to use it for the multiplex, but we don't. So now these reserves are now really open for the items that council would like to use them for. And I'm going on a little bit. The revenue sharing, it's not a specific reserve for a specific purpose, but we do use it for some specific things.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Zahara. You're muted, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, we would still have 1.743 million in the revenue sharing reserve. So I certainly would support that that transfer into the Civic Center, Cultural Center Reserve.
Anyone else? Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Ms. Bittner. So based on the discussion and the comments regarding like legislative services and certain things that certain expenses that will likely not incur in 2021 because of COVID and the lessening of travel and some reduced expenses. If we don't, if we keep that in the budget, then that'll just, what happens to the end of that? Can you just go over that? What will happen next year and what 2020's kind of budget is looking like based on those exact kind of expenses that we're referring to? Are we actually saving anything, or where does that money end up?
Through the chair, Councillor Byer, it's a sort of easy and hard question, really. Okay, if we don't spend all our money that we have budgeted, we end up with a surplus that we can then bring back to council, and you can allocate it to reserves from there, or it flows into our unrestricted surplus, which I think at the moment has about 160,000 in it. And we use that to sometimes offset if we might have a slight deficit some year or a surplus. I think if you remember, we actually used our unrestricted surplus to fund that, or the 1.8 from the wastewater treatment plant, because it had grown to that amount within that. So generally, it just flows through to our accumulated surplus, and it can either be allocated to a specific reserve, or it can sit in that sort of floating unrestricted surplus. So it doesn't. If everything's not spent, then we end up with that surplus, and that's what happens.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Ms. Bittner. So just to follow up with that, based on last year's, is there money left over then, or does that not, we're not there yet?
Through the chair to Councillor Byer. Yeah, last year was, yeah. we have completed our side of the financial statements. We ended up with a $75,000 deficit at the end of 2020, which I think for the type of year it was isn't the worst position we could have been in for that. I think some of our budget adjustments through the year were well worth doing. So what that means is our unrestricted surplus will then drop by $75,000. So as far as 2020 goes, no, we did not end up with a surplus that we can reallocate that to anything.
Councillor Curry.
Knowing that we would have 2.743 in revenue sharing, I would be in support of moving $1 million into the future civic culture facility. I do know that it's a need and something in the future, and I support putting there, and I think it does put the focus on there. But I also think if COVID continues and it's years of this, it will not be. But if it is, all of our reserves can be moved around. So I think it just puts a focus by putting in there, but that doesn't necessarily mean if something were to come up with the budget and something were to happen, and we did need to move it, or something came up with the multi-complex, it could be moved. But I'm comfortable putting it there just so it has a focus, knowing that in COVID times, all of our reserves could be used differently if need be.
Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Ms. Bittner, I'm also in support of moving $1 million from the revenue sharing agreement reserved to the civic culture facility. Just as Councillor Curry said, if something came up, we can always reallocate it as necessary, just like any of our reserves. But I think there's definitely some needs coming up, as there always is. Thanks.
Councillor Schonard.
To the chair, I'm sitting here totally confused. This council spent 3.5 years raising money for a multiplex, and I'm not against, I know we're saying an art center. If we got an extra $1 million, shouldn't we be adding that to our pool so we would borrow less money? And the quicker we paid this other building proposed, then we could move forward with a second one. So I'm sitting here wondering what to do with the extra $1 million. It's a no-brainer. Add it to the multiplex. Instead of borrowing $5 million, we can borrow $4 million. So I'm sitting here confused, wondering, what are we putting $1 million? We're going to be borrowing money. Let's cut that debt down, move on to the next building when the time comes.
Anyone want to stab at that? Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Councillor Chenard or to council. By allocating the money to a civic culture facility, we haven't actually discussed what we'd spend the money on, but we do know that there are numerous needs within the community. And as far as I know, there hasn't been a discussion on creating another facility anywhere at all. So that's just my reply to that.
Councillor Curry.
And I would just add to, at this point, we have no idea what type of debunkture we are taking out. We're not at that point yet in our funding because we still don't know what will be coming in for future grants and for future sponsorship. So at no point, all we have said is a bylaw saying we can get a debunkture. We have never discussed it. I don't think we're close to that point, are we, CO Bittner? To knowing exactly how much our debunkture will be?
Follow up, Ms. Bittner.
Through the chair to Councillor Curry. At the moment, it's sitting at $9 million. That was the bylaw that we passed. We don't have to draw that down if other funding comes available. I mean, we have to remember this is a $70 million facility, and I think a debenture for $9 million on that is actually very reasonable. And we still have to look forward as well. This isn't just the one thing we're going to build forever. I think we still also need to look forward past the completion of this facility.
I believe Mayor Zahara and then Councillor Curry. And then Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Councillor Chenard's point, yes, the multiplex absolutely has been a focus over the last 3 years, but we have other things that we need to look forward to. one of the main things when you're talking about financial planning and capital projects of this size is they're going to serve decades of Edsonites, and those Edsonites have to help pay for their share of that capital cost. That's why municipalities often borrow money, so those users of those facilities 10 years from now are actually contributing to the building of that facility. And I would also say that it's all dependent as well on what the bids come in on the multiplex. We may get some really great prices, we may get some really horrible prices, and we can make adjustments when those times come. This is simply parking some money aside for this facility. We still have 1.7 million that will be in revenue sharing for whatever project or whatever issue that comes up. And the following year, we're going to have another amount of money coming from Yellowhead County revenue sharing, which can be allocated to whatever council of the day decides. Just like they can move money out of that reserve, the $3 million, if council does proceed with that, to whatever project they see fit. It's merely parking money to the side as a future project that isn't going to be happening anytime in the very near future. But we got to start putting money aside because we do know that we have some serious deficiencies within our current civic center and some other needs or wants in our community. So that's why I'm supporting this. And reserves are very flexible, so things can get moved around depending on what's going on at that point in time.
Councillor Curry and then Councillor Wilkinson.
I'm good.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, we are looking forward and we need to for the multiplex, but really, I think we need to look down sometimes too and look at our infrastructure. Our roads are absolutely horrible and they need to be attended to. Our asset management, we failed bitterly on our asset management plan. I think if we're going to put money somewhere, it should be put into fixing some of the things that do need fixing. So I won't be supporting the transfer.
May I respond before Mayor Zahara? I would just say make a proposal then right tonight and you can have extra road funding. Mayor Zahara.
Thank you. And the asset management plan is a very good point. Buildings are a failure where most of our buildings are ranking as the lowest level within the asset management plan, where our roads are not. Roads are definitely an issue. And we are spending $1.2 million this year and next year and the following year as a part of our capital plan. We certainly can bump that up. We do have flexibility within our reserves. But if we want to talk about the asset management plan, you look at the building envelope, and that is what is ranked the worst within our community. So we certainly need to deal with that, as well as all the other issues within our.
I'll just agree with Mayor Zahara's comments that it's unfair for us to ask, in my opinion, it's unfair for us to ask the population of Edson in 2021 to pay for the entire multiplex facility. So I think that's a great reason to use debentures to spread the support for that facility over many years and over many populations of Edson. So I completely agree with that. Any other comments? Ms. Bittner.
Just before we move on, if there's no other comments on the operating, I just want to make sure I have the sort of support on these different things. So for the moving of the 1 million to the future cultural facility, I believe I had 4 people for that. Is that correct? So that
is my count as well.
Okay.
So
with the not the mill rate, with the taxation increase, what would be an amount you would like to see brought back to you, and then I can then figure out exactly how much that would need to come from the reserves. So what sort of taxation increase is council aiming towards? A 1% maybe?
Mayor Zahara.
At this point in time, based on what is going on currently with the third wave, I'd be in support of anywhere from 0 to 0.5.
Anyone else? Councillor Chenard.
I'm going to agree with the mayor. If we can go 0 to 0.5, that would be great because that's a reduction. Perfect. I'd support that.
Councillor Curry.
I would like 1.
Councillor
I'd
Byer.
still support 1.9, but I'll go to 1.
Councillor Byer.
I'd be comfortable reducing it to around 1%.
Personally, my thoughts were the 0.5 to 1%. Councillor Wilkinson.
1.
All right, I think we have a majority for 1. Any other comments or questions on the 2021 budget adjustments? Mayor Zahara.
Or do we have majority on 1? Yeah, I guess we do. Councillor Byer, Curry, and Wilkinson. Where are you at, Councillor Sorensen?
I was 0.5 to
1. Okay. Can we do it 0.9?
I would support that. Councillor Curry?
0.
Councillor Curry is sticking to 1. Byer is sticking to 1.
So 0.9 it is.
I'm going to 0.5 then. Better move on.
We got to move on. Do you have
Is it a
enough?
1? Is it a 1?
I believe
Okay.
you have
0.95.
Okay, we're moving on. I'm making an executive decision.
So I'll bring that back next week for passing along with the mill rate bylaw and all of that information that goes with that. Okay, thank you. All right. Yeah, so moving on from operating is the capital budget. That really, only thing really changed there is we've brought over some of those items from 2020 that were to be continued on, and they've just been added into that list. One thing that's not on the list that I discovered today was those 2 digital signs that we purchased. We didn't receive them until 2021, so they weren't in 2020, and I didn't have them in 2021 either. So they will also be added to that list when it comes back next week for passing.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I'm just not sure if the Lions Park was anything to be added in that one. We talked about having it slightly when you come into Edson. I would think part and parcel of the Lions Park upgrade would be in that then.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilkinson, I don't remember that being in the capital budget previously.
It was about 3 strategic plans ago, and we've kept carrying it through on that list. And we have got some things done now. We did get the sewer fixed again, so that's nice. But we did talk about having a pleasant looking town to come into.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely that reflects on it because it is the town's campground.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilkinson, I think that would really be more operational if we're sort of beautifying up the entranceway there. I'm not sure that's, I know we discussed it a couple of meetings ago, but that's definitely not in this budget at this time, but I'm sure we can bring that back to and discuss some more nailing that down nailing down.
Okay, hoping we could at our 4th strategic plan on the same topic. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Mayor Zahara.
I do see that we have Mr. Ham with us here today, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if maybe we can get an idea of what we are looking at for capital roadwork this year. I certainly would be in favor of allocating some of that money from revenue sharing to do a little bit more work this year and getting some of those issues addressed in our community or additional stormwater management work. I don't know, Mr. Ham, if you can give us a brief update or your thoughts on that, if you could give us your thoughts.
I'll make you a deal, Mayor. We will bring the road matrix survey that we did to committee in the very near future, 2 weeks from now. And then we can assess from there. But we are coming up with a long-term plan so that it's not trying to front load it in 2021 and trying to spread it out evenly over the period of repairs so that we're not front loading again in 25 years to try and make up for our heavy our paving schedule that would happen now. So we're trying to look at this from a short-term and a long-term perspective.
Appreciate that. Any other comments, questions for capital budget? Councillor Byer.
Thanks through the chair to Ms. Bittner. Based on everything that we have in the budget and some of the things that have rolled over from 2020 to 2021 because of COVID and just the inability to accomplish some of those projects, what are we looking at to accomplish this year as far as like, are we short in staffing in any areas that look like that we might not, even though we've included it in the budget, it may not come to fruition if I guess COVID continues as it has, and if we're short in any departments that would prevent us from achieving these projects.
Sure, through the chair to Councillor Byer. Yes, we did have a lot that carried over more than we usually would have on top of what we'd already decided for 2021. A lot of the things from 2020 have already had the ball was already rolling. We just have to complete them. But I think we would definitely be. We may have to come back to council at some stage and say, this may have to move off. It will just depend on our capital projects manager, the amount of work that we can expect him to produce this year. I don't know if Mitch has anything to add to that. But we're definitely going, we're trying to get these things done and tenders out for some of those things, but then there may be some that we may have to come back and say, well, we might have to put that.
Yeah, I'll just add that project cycles are what they are, and they don't necessarily follow annual project or annual cycles. So we do the best we can to fall within annual cycles, but there are some cases where we have carryover because of weather and things like that. So we will do our best.
Mayor Zahara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of my main concerns, and I've brought this up a couple times, is what's happening with Vision Park. I do know we have Mr. Schramm on the line. I don't think we have. We do have the Vision Park well washroom project, as well as some other work scheduled there. Are some of the diamonds scheduled to be fixed this summer? I'm just once again concerned that we're going to be ending up with no work being done there this year and have yet another season next year not being able to play on some diamonds. I don't know if Mr. Schramm can give me an update or.
Yeah, through the chair to the mayor. No, for sure. We are doing some internal drainage work out at Vision Park as we speak. We've had a little bit of a slow time with our infrastructure group, and they've been able to put some work into there. We have taken a pretty active approach on looking at what we want to do this year internally. We know it's time to move forward. A lot of our diamonds wintered very, very well, which is very positive. So our users for this year, if they're allowed to play based on COVID, will have access to some of those diamonds. But you're also correct, it is a time to start moving forward with some of the upgrades on those parks. The master plan, we made a few tweaks to it. The consultant will have that final document out to us very shortly, which we'll present at strategic planning session. However, once that document is there, we know some of these diamonds are going to remain where they're at. We need some upgrades, and we really want to move forward on those upgrades this year. This may be a good opportunity to do it because there's a possibility with the COVID restrictions that all won't be happening again. The other big project is obviously the reconstruction of the diamonds that were taken out by the pipeline. And again, we're still working closely with the pipeline company to get some resolution to that where it's at. There have been delays getting an answer from them. They keep moving it up the ladder within the organization. So again, we're going to keep working diligently to try and get some answers on that pipeline. Ideally, we'd love to see some construction once we get that commitment of that funds on those brand new diamonds, because they're probably a 2-year project.
Mayor Zahara.
Thank you, Mr. Schramm, for that update. I really do appreciate that. We did have some very preliminary discussions, and I don't know where they went when that construction of TMX was occurring, about doing a connector trail from Vision Park through that right of way. I don't know if there's been any discussions with TMX to see if that would be a possibility. Obviously, we've had some discussions about ensuring Vision Park is connected to where the new multiplex is, and having some sort of trail or walkway so people could bike or walk to Vision Park if they see fit. Do you have any updates that you can provide at this point, or would you need to go back?
I probably have to do a little research on the pipeline right away. I understand the pipeline right away does cross some private properties. I'm not sure the impacts of being able to install trail system through some of the private properties. We do have a plan within our Trails Master Plan to extend it from other areas within town, potentially through the subdivision that's going to be going north of the hospital. We're looking at some of the design work there, and another trail extension coming from the Lions Park up through some of the green spaces we have leading into Vision Park. We think it's critical that Vision Park does have trail access, and it's really important that we do that planning. But as far as the running down the pipeline right away, I've not been involved in that discussion. I know our previous CEO had a willingness to think that that was an option, but it is definitely something we could consider looking at. I'm just not sure the impacts when we're dealing with some of those private properties.
Manager Hare?
Well, I certainly think now is the opportunity to have those discussions and see where we may or may not be able to go. With that area all cleared out, I think it would be a perfect opportunity to at least look and pursue that to see what the option.
I fully support that as well. I would like to talk about a trail to Wilmore Park, but we can talk about that during strategic planning. Doesn't have to be now. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I think we're done with budget. Thank you. Moving on to Community and Protective Services, Mutual Aid Fire and Control Plan. Welcome, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How are you this evening?
Excellent.
As am I. The Flames won 3-2, so I'm pretty happy with that overtime victory. So thank you, first off, Mayor and Council, for having me this evening. Really, the primary reason I'm only speaking to this tonight is it does have a budgetary effect, which terrifies me after Sarah's presentation and moving millions of dollars back and forth, but I'll do my best to try to nickel and dime you a little bit here. Gonna try to share my screen so I can give you a presentation here. Share. Steve, how am I doing?
Yeah, good.
Go ahead.
What have I got to do here? We're good? You can
we're good.
Start your slideshow.
Oh, right. Okay. Slideshow. Sorry, guys. So the town of Edson and Alberta Ag and Forestry have had a mutual aid fire control plan for a lot of years, for sure, ever since I've been here. This will be a very brief presentation, but the primary focus of the mutual aid fire control plan, there's 4 main areas. There's prevention and detection, which includes the fire smart work that we've done very successfully over the last several years. We've done hazard reduction burns, and we receive updates and risk levels from Alberta Ag and Forestry. The next one is pre-suppression, which includes current conditions. It's basically an update email that we receive from Ag and Forestry on a regular basis, on a daily basis, during the fire season, which started March 1st, by the way. It also includes equipment and combustibles. So we actually house a lot of equipment, mainly hand equipment like the backpacks and the Wildland kits, as well as consumables, which is the Class A foam that Alberta Ag and Forestry provides us. The next one is Wildfire Operations, which are requests for mutual aid. And the new one that I'll discuss in detail here, but I'm just going to highlight it, is a $50,000 Ag and Forestry initial attack. Give me just a second. I'm going to highlight that in a second. And then the last one is training. So we do joint training exercises, as well as we're provided with online and field training exercises and programs from Alberta Ag and Forestry. Edson, we do have some real threats just on our demographics and our location within the province, and we're within the Forest Protection District. So I'm just going to bring up a couple real quick highlights. The Slave Lake fire in 2011, we all know this, but it destroyed a third of the town. 374 properties were a total loss. 52 additional properties were damaged. 732 people were left homeless. And that was over 700 million in insurable damage. 10 years ago, we thought that was the end all and that would never happen again. 5 years later, Fort McMurray happened. 85 to 90% of the community was damaged. 2,400 properties were a total loss. The entire city and outlying communities were evacuated. Thousands were left homeless. And to this day, still 15,000 people have not returned to the city, to their own homes. Almost $10 billion in insurable damage was recorded for the Fort McMurray fires. I'm not trying to fearmonger, but we're not far off of that type of situation here. We have three very large wildland fire concerns for our community, and they're circled in yellow on your screen there. West is to your left. So the large circle on the left is between Range Road 180 and the acreages along 63rd. Big pine stands, big, the highly combustible flammables, black spruce. It's scary, and we don't have ground access. The small access down there to the bottom left is where Councillor Chouinard lives. Councillor Chouinard, please fire smart your property. I'll do my best to take as much wood off there for Tanner's Timbers as I possibly can, but I can't keep up. And then along the tracks, right from the RCMP detachment all the way to the overpass, there's a very thick wooded area all through there as well. That's a very large fire hazard. In the past, over the last 8 years, we've done really successful fire smart work, where to the point where we've had wildfires in there and they haven't spread because of the fuel reduction and the efforts that we've made with the province through grant funding primarily. What we're proposing basically in our new fire control plan with the province is to allow Alberta Ag and Forestry, should they see, because they staff a tower during the wildfire season, should they see a wildfire that appears to be a threat to the town, and it looks like we cannot provide ground access by our own local fire crews, let them fight it. Let them come in, let them do an initial attack, let them save our community. $50,000 is what we're, and I'm not even sure how to explain the budget for that, because it may not be an annual budget request for that $50,000, but should it happen, 50 grand covers 3 bomber drops before a ground crew gets there. And that could literally save the entire west side of our community. I just want to highlight from 63rd Street West, all those really nice, expensive acreages, we don't have hydrant protection out there. We have to haul water to that area. There's no water services there. They're on wells. So that this area here is a very high concern for us. This area, not so bad. Gene has lots of money and he can move. This area here is another high concern because trains start fires, and that thick wooded area is all along the train tracks. And that's also an area where our homeless population tends to set up tents and light fires and just to keep warm. And, that's going to happen. However, it runs a very high risk. Some benefits in communication, and we've gone back and forth with Ag and Forestry over the last probably 6 weeks with this agreement. We've agreed to an immediate all-party notification. So if our dispatch notices something, or if a caller calls in, or if the Ag and Forestry Tower sees a wildfire, both parties are notified immediately, and there's an immediate response from both agencies. There's an ability to action the fire before ground crews arrive. So if there's, a couple of you have the knowledge and the experience of this picture here is actually the Tiffin fire a few years back, where we did have a bomber come in, and they did, pardon me, they did need to drop retardant on a wildland fire to protect our community. We want that to happen before I have to make a call and say, hey, our town's burning, can you help? We want that ability to allow them to recognize that there is a true threat to our community and they can action it. Clear communication with Edson Command and Alberta Ag and Forestry. So the all-party notification, everyone's aware of it immediately. If the situation warrants, then dispatch air tankers on, especially on that west side. That's the dominant windward side. We have communication with Ag and Forestry in the air and on the ground. And the goal is to limit spread of the fire and reduce the threat of to the community. Again, I hate going after Sarah because she talked about a lot of dollars, and this is a $50,000 touch. But we're 5 years later again, and this is the driest spring we've seen in a whole bunch of years. So the wildfire threat is very real. It's very true, and it can't be ignored. So that's pretty much my presentation. I am open to any questions or comments or concerns you may have. And there, stop share is done.
All right, I will go to Councillor Schnard, then Mayor Zahara and Councillor Curry.
Now you scared the hell out of me. I got to tune my fire truck up. But my question to you is, the actual 50,000, is that annually?
So yeah, that's sorry about that. Through the chair to Councillor Schnard. Maybe, maybe not. It depends. So if Ag and Forestry saw fire and they actioned it, dollars would come out. Would it happen this year? Probably not. Maybe not next year. It's just a $50,000 fund where we're allowing Ag and Forestry to come action a fire within the town limits in that densely populated forested area up to a maximum of 50 grand. So it may not be an annual. It's a fund that we are looking as a contingency if a real true threat of wildfire threatens the town of Edson. So that for 10 years, we could use it this year. It depends on what fire happens.
Okay, can I do a follow-up now that he's clarified
Sure.
that? So if I'm understanding it, I fully agree with you. Like, you get 3 drops from a water bomber. So I look at it as fire insurance for our town. And so I agree with the Tiffin fire when they reacted. I mean, 50,000, even though we're crunching numbers, it could easily cost us $5 million if things go wrong. So I'm all about it because yes, forestry is looking out, and you did have a really good example when the Tiffin fire hit, the water bombers come in, they can act faster than we can. So I look at it, 50,000 for insurance. I'm all for it.
Mr. Tram would like to respond.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate a little bit more on Tyler's presentation. Good job, Tyler, by the way. The fire control plan and work with Ag and Forestry, we have to understand, Ag and Forestry will provide service, but it is all on a cost recovery basis, and that is the model from the province. Everything is cost recovery. What this $50,000 reserve does is it allows them to do an initial attack to prevent a fire from going from a very small containable fire to something very large and impacting our community. So that's kind of the development of this, is create a reserve sitting there that, again, if we have a lot of rain, we never use it, fantastic. But if we do have a scenario where that fire is starting small, they action it, they do not need the town's permission to action it the way the plan is written right now. This gives them that ability to go action it up to that maximum 50,000. If the fire grows, obviously, like Chief Robinson said, there's going to be great communication between our fire services, our community, and our elected officials so they know we need to do more. But that gives them that ability to get out there, hit it fast, hit it hard, and hopefully knock it down before it becomes a bigger impact for the community.
Mr. Robinson.
And just to follow up on GM Shram, it buys us time. It buys the ground crews time. There's so many areas within the town of Edson boundaries that we simply do not have ground access to. unless we grab a backpack and a ranger and spend 20 minutes trying to drive to that area. And that's just real. So it buys the fire department time to get there and assess, like GM Schramm said. After that, we are still in command. We still call the shots, and we still make the final decision on whether we need the mutual aid support from Alberta Ag and Forestry, or if we can handle the situation after the initial attack from ANF.
Mayor Zahara.
Thank you for your presentation, Chief Robinson, and I look forward to seeing GM Schramm in our Calgary Flames jersey later this week. The situation that you explained in Slave Lake and Fort McMurray is very real. I remember, I can't remember the gentleman's name who did a presentation at the Galloway about some fire modeling in our community, and depending on wind direction and conditions, it can get very serious very quick before you even roll trucks out of the hall. We've seen with Slave Lake, wind was a huge factor in that. And we are very fortunate in our community to have a fire base that's well equipped. Those birds are in the air quick. And I think it is a very worthwhile initiative to get those resources dealing with that initial attack quickly and easily. And we may actually see that happen more than once in one fire season. Depending on the conditions. We have a big threat here with mountain pine beetle and dead tree stands. So I am 150% in support of this. I know Ms. Bittner probably is cringing a little bit, but that this is preventative instead of us having to spend who knows how many millions of dollars and the damage that can be caused to our community if we don't have that initial attack. So certainly support this and having a reserve fund is set aside so our partners can help us in these situations. And we've seen that with Hillendale a few years ago too. Helicopters were dropping water on a fire in phase 2 before it was built, before the fire department got there. And I think that really helped the situation.
Yeah. Through the chair to Zahara, they were dropping before the fire department got there. We were actually radioing and requesting drop locations from the helicopter. So we were on scene and we were actioning the fire prior to their arrival. So I just want to make that part clear. We did get there and we have a very good fire department who's, with the green lights you approved, we're on scene pretty quick.
Councillor Curry.
Perfect. You corrected me and I was seeing if you're paying attention.
Go ahead, Councillor Curry.
I would just like to say I am a little disappointed, GM Schramm. I thought you were wearing the Flames jersey tonight, so the town could be demoed as a Southern Alberta original person. I just thought that was in the plan. Unfortunately, maybe next Tuesday. I'm in full support of this. I think definitely it is a need, and this is just being smart planning ahead. Prevention is always the best bet. Ms. Bittner, you always know best where money should come from and such, but we were just discussing that revenue sharing. And so just the idea of taking from that revenue sharing, just $50,000 and putting it into a reserve that is for the fire department specifically for this, just a thought, knowing that it's still, even with the million now, it's still at 1.7. So just thought, but you always know best where that comes from.
Councillor Byron.
Thanks. Through the chair to Fire Chief Robinson and Ms. Bittner. Thank you for the presentation. I am absolutely 100% in support of creating a reserve, or I do have a question. Does that $50,000, is that a reserve that stays within the town, just set aside, or does that go into the government's fire reserve? And I see it's that it would be funded from the Public Safety Reserve, or sorry, the Public Safety Initiative Reserve. And would that just bring it down to 54,000? I think it's at 104 right now.
Go ahead, Mr. Go ahead, Ms. Bittner.
Through the chair to Councillor Byer and to Councillor Curry. Yes, we had Mr. Schramm and I have discussed this. We would look to move it from one reserve to another. We had discussed the Public Safety Initiative. which at the end of this year is budgeted to have 104. So yes, if we move 50 into a reserve for that, that would leave 54 in that reserve. But we can move it from any reserve that council wishes. We just thought that would be the best way to fund it. It wouldn't increase taxation at all. It would just be moving some of our reserves into a specific reserve for this.
Follow up, Councillor Byer.
Thanks. Through the chair to Mr. Robinson or Mr. Schramm. Regarding just, Mr. Robinson, you did say that it is a very dry year, and I think it's easy to see that we don't have snow that we had a ton of last year. Is the town interested in doing any fire smart prevention to the locals and talking about, the current conditions and how we can avoid having a fire within town or in the treat areas of town?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Byer. Thank you very much for the question. We did, up until about 16 months ago, we invested a little bit of money into a particular individual to be our fire smart face. Unfortunately, he got a better job in Edmonton, and we don't have that face right now. However, that is obviously a great idea. With that said, the province and everything that's happened in the last 15, 16 months, the grants that are available, the FREA grant is very, very dry right now. We've exhausted our Fire Smart grants, and we're looking at basically maintenance programs on what we've already done for Fire Smart. A lot of the Fire Smart areas are privately owned, which fortunately the hospital, the area around the hospital has applied for a grant, and they're going to be fire smarting that area. Al, GM Schramm, perhaps you could talk to this a little bit more intelligently than I can right now, but I am aware that they are approved for a grant fund to perform fire smarting in that thick wooded area around the hospital toward Gamoka Drive and the Ball Diamonds. I don't know when that exactly is going to start, but maybe Al, can you touch on that?
Yep, just to reaffirm what Chief Robinson is saying. The fire smarting initiative that the community has taken over the years has created some really positive results. Municipalities can only apply for funding for fire smarting properties that are owned within the municipality, and all our properties have been completed to the fire smart standard. The hospital property, AHS, we did some work with them about 2 years ago, pre-COVID. We identified that within our community protection plan, that it was definitely an area that needed some attention. And we engaged the hospital to look at this potential funding, and great news is they did get some funding to our belief. And they will be doing that fire smarting on the hospital property only, mostly to the south of the hospital and around the hospital. So we should see that happening hopefully this spring or summer. So that work should be done. But beyond that, like Mr. Robinson said, the responsibility of a lot of these other areas are private properties. And as a municipality, we cannot apply for funding for these private properties. And the province doesn't offer funding to private properties to do fire smarting. So there is some definitely challenges there.
Just before Councillor Byer gets another turn, I'd like to put my 2 cents in. While the mayor was 150% in support, I am in 200% in support. I used to work for Alberta Sustainable Resource Development, and I know how little 3 bomber drops would actually affect. So my recommendation is actually we put 100,000 into reserve. You might not necessarily need to give permission to the provincial government to spend. Maybe you only give them permission to spend 50. But in the case of emergency, I do not want any hesitation at all. So that is my recommendation to council. It's just a reserve. It's not going to be spent every year necessarily. And to increase his request to 100,000. 6 bomber drops is still very little hectares of fire to deal with. Councillor Byer and then Councillor Wilkinson.
Thanks. Through the chair to Mr. Robinson and Mr. Schramm. So I was maybe not referring to applying for more grants for Fire Smart because you did mention that they were a little dry, but more education. If the property owners don't understand what fire smarting is, and I believe there's 10 steps, and I think I've heard of most of them, but I'm not even super familiar with them, then they're not really even in a position to fixing something that they don't know is an error. In a quick response to Councillor Sorensen, I was under the understanding that a CAO would have, I think, $100,000 of powers in the event of emergency to just go ahead and spend. So I'm comfortable leaving it at 50,000 and letting the CAO powers be at play at that point.
Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Byer. You're right, and I apologize for not answering the second half of your question. And I think it's a great idea. I started down the path of talking about our Fire Smart face that had recently left. I didn't follow up, and that's my fault. Yeah, I think it's a great idea to, the properties on the outlying areas, especially on the west side of town. Maybe there's some Fire Smart paraphernalia or propaganda, or however you want to call it, that we can distribute, especially on the west side of 63rd Street, to make them more familiar. The two primaries for private homeowners would be storage of firewood and basically the pruning and manicuring of their own property to make sure it's fire smart, so fires don't spread. And it's basic stuff, that lateral fuel on the thick trees, the grass cutting, and don't put your dry seasoned spruce firewood right against the side of your vinyl sided house, because that's just not a good idea for anyone. So yeah, I agree with that, and that's certainly something we'll look into. Councillor Byer, thank you very much.
Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, both Tyler and Al, thank you very much for the presentation. The guys might set a limit at it. To me, it's just priceless. You need to do this. 50,000, 100,000. It's going to save people's lives one day. So we have to be prepared. Thank you.
Mayor Zahara?
I hate to use Councillor Chenard's saying here, but you got a blank check if something like this happens. I don't think any of us will complain. And I would never want our staff to ever hesitate. Spend what you need to spend to get the situation under control.
May I?
Robinson?
Sorry, and through the chair to Mayor Zahara. To be clear, it's not our blank check. It's giving permission to the province to action a fire without our permission. So it's not me saying, hey man, come on in and bring your tankers and there's a big party. It's not that case. It's if they see something and we don't have the ability to get there, they don't need our permission. They can action it up to a dollar value. I'm hesitant, and no offense, Councillor Sorensen, but I'm hesitant to go to the $100,000 mark, simply because, like I said earlier, it's a tool for us to buy time to get there and assess the situation. If our ground crews from the Edson Fire Department can arrive on scene after one or two dumps, which I 100% understand, sometimes don't do a whole pile. If it knocks it down to the point where it's a lateral fuel fire or a ground fire, and we can action it from them, we can stand them down and save money and still save the property, right? It's not I don't want to look at it as a blank check. I want to look at it as the province is buying us time to get a little bit of a bite, so we can get on scene and do a proper assessment and see what the risks are.
Okay, if you don't think you need it, I'll rescind my proposal. Anyone else? Ms. Bettner wants to say something.
I want to talk about money. Okay, so I think we're in, I see a consensus to set up a reserve for 50,000. So which reserve would you like me to move the money over from? And I can bring that also included next week.
Mayor Zahara.
Whatever you feel is appropriate, but I think revenue sharing would be a great, we have a lot of money in there, and I don't want to deplete our public safety reserve because there may be some things that may come up.
All right, I shall do that, and that will also come next week when I present the budget.
Okay. There's no other comments. We will move on. Thank you very much. Excellent. Oh, goodbye. We have no information items, no sundry items. We'll move on to questions from media and public. Do we have any?
We have Adrian here, but I don't know if she has any questions.
No questions at this time. Thank you, Ms. Tate. We'll move. There's no closed meeting sessions. We'll have open for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Chenard, beat you to the punch. All in favor? Pass. Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening.